with a team that came in second in the conference last year, came up just short in the championship game, but had their first double-digit win season in school history this year. That's the Iowa State Cyclones, checking in at number 6 on our listener rankings. This team brings back a lot from that team that was historic for the program last year. Becht, of course, is one of the nation's best at quarterback, enters his junior season ready to make another run to the conference title. Top 2 running backs are back. They've lost 2,000-yard receivers. That's going to be a big question mark, is who steps up in that receiving game. But the defense is bringing a lot of talent back too. They were nasty against the pass last year, 166 yards per game allowed through the air. They bring back John Tez Williams and Jeremiah Cooper in the secondary. They were little susceptible against the run. They had some big games, 5 games where they gave up over 200 yards last year. But the linebacker core is going to bring a lot of guys back from injury. So 6 feels about like the floor for Iowa State this year to me. That's where they check in on these rankings. I feel like we'll probably see them a little bit higher in the final season standings.
Yeah, and I wrote that I think Iowa State gets out to a relatively hot start. I mean, we'll talk about Kansas State, obviously, in the next episode. Spoiler, if you haven't been paying attention. But I think that game in Dublin, the Aer Lingus Classic, we get Farmageddon. I think that's a coin flip. I truly do.
Who's favored in that game? Because we need to just pick the underdog at this point. Every year it feels like.
I'm betting Kansas State.
I bet Kansas State. Yeah, I bet Kansas State is favored, and that's not been very good for the team that's favored in Dublin.
Yeah, this might be a comfy spot then for Campbell and the Cyclones. I do. Becht was not a happy surprise, but I think the way that he stepped into the starting role in the wake of the gambling scandal and Hunter Deckers, right? That was the former quarterback. When Deckers was ousted, it just left a huge void at QB1, and it felt like Iowa State had just lost its identity, and who knew what we were going to expect from the Cyclones. And he stepped in and has performed admirably. And he now is Iowa State football. Certainly one of the best quarterbacks to ever go through Ames, which is exciting. You mentioned the running backs. They've got Carson Hansen and Abu Salma III that are both back. Xavier Townsend is the UCF transfer, and then Chase Sowell is the ECU transfer. And they're going to try and step in and replace Jalen Noel and Jaden Higgins, the 2,000-yard receivers you mentioned earlier. So there's a lot of past production from a wide receiver standpoint that they've got to replace, but I do like what they did in the portal. The offensive line returns 4 or 5 starters, so I think that's going to be pretty stout. I think this offense is going to be as consistent as we've seen it. It was not a super flashy offense last year, 41st in scoring, 39th in total offense, but they got the job done, and they cruised to an 11-3 victory. You know, the defense and stopping the run for me becomes the key. If they were able to stop the run in that sloppy game against Texas Tech, you know, there wouldn't have been the drama at the end of the year that we had with whether or not Iowa State was going to get to Arlington. If you're able to stop the run, Cam Scatterbo probably does not do inhumane things to your linebackers and safeties, right? Yeah. So they've got to take that step forward in physicality. You know, I hate the 3-3-5. Any team that cannot stop the run, their fan base hates the 3-3-5. I don't know if it's built to. You have to have a very specific recipe to be great at pass defense, which they have been, and also be able to take away those 5 and 6 yard totes on the ground. And I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that this year or not. Tyler Odium left. They've got Dominique Orange, who's going to step up and be the nose tackle go-to once again. But the front 6, I guess, in that 3-3-5 scheme is the biggest question that I have for the Cyclones. And their level of play, to me, determines whether or not they get back to 10-plus wins or not.
I think the optimistic view of that front 6 is the linebacker core was just decimated with injuries last year. They were churning through guys. And if you're going to play a scheme where 3 linebackers are on the field, you're going to be more exposed easily if your top 3 or 4 or even 5 at times are out with injuries.
Yeah.
The bright side of that is they're bringing back a ton of guys that got experience last year. There's going to be a ton of experience in that room. They now all of a sudden because they were so injured last year, now have depth and experienced depth in that room. So that's the optimistic view if you're looking for a rosy picture of Iowa State's ability to stop the run. But it was bad last year. It was, like I said, 5 games where they gave up over 200 yards, 2 games where they gave up over 300 on the ground. Just not going to be winning football.
And they won one of them. They
did.
UCF.
It took a Herculean effort from Rocco Becht to grasp victory from the jaws of defeat in that game. I need to go back and find like the post-game win expectancy that Bill Connolly always puts out for that, because I'm sure all the stats said, yeah, UCF by 30 in this game.
Well, I believe that was the weekend that I was at a wedding in Des Moines, and so we only had so many phones at the table, and I was sitting at a table full of Hawkeye fans, so we're watching Iowa. But every time Iowa State initially did something terrible, like gave up a big run, half the reception groaned because there were so many Iowa State fans. And then as they started to come back, that side of the room got louder and louder and louder. It ended up being a really funny dichotomy because Iowa had a frustrating loss to Michigan State that night. And then Iowa State, as you mentioned, grasped victory from the jaws of defeat. It truly was a wonderful night to be sipping on a cocktail and just be a third party, knowing that my team had won earlier in the day, so it was all good for me.
Man, okay, yeah, we won that day, so that's awesome. So, yeah, great season last year, of course. We look at the schedule this year. You mentioned that they open in Ireland, Farmageddon overseas.
So weird. Why are we doing
so weird?
Why? Leave the rivalry game on campus. What are we doing?
They're both getting a paycheck for it. I kind of love it. I kind of love that we're getting.
It's gonna be kooky.
One of the weirdest rivalry games in another country. This is going to be our greatest export for the year 2025 from the United States, and I'm here for it. A tricky South Dakota team. That's a tricky FCS game, as tricky as it possibly could be. They get Cyhawk at home. And then even trickier, they're going to Jonesboro, Arkansas to take on Arkansas State. I don't know who signed that contract, if they didn't read the fine print or something, but that's a weird game against a team that won 8 in the Sun Belt last year. So beware. We've, of course, seen Big 12 teams and Iowa State specifically struggle with some G5 teams in the past. But looking at the conference schedule, it feels like it could be a lot worse. It feels like they got off not completely easy, but they play Arizona State. They get them at home. That's really the only true contender that they have on the schedule other than Kansas State and Farmageddon overseas to begin the year. The rest of it's very, very manageable, especially when you look at the home road splits.
Yeah, I agree. I like the runway, especially. I feel like if they can beat Kansas State, I will go on record. I said that Iowa State would beat Iowa in Iowa City last year. Hawkeye fans did not like that. It ended up happening. Well, Hawkeye fans, you get your revenge. I'm picking the opposite this year. I'm going to take Iowa to win in Ames. So all the Cyclone fans, 3techpod@gmail.com if you want to disagree with me. But if they can start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-1, which I think is very, very possible given this schedule, then you host an interesting BYU team. We'll talk about them in the next episode. I think a lot of doubt surrounds BYU because of the Jake Retzlaff news, and they're going to have to find a new QB1. But that BYU roster, I really like. There's a lot of positives to still be picking the Cougars to win a number of games. So that'll be an interesting one. Arizona State, obviously, the job that Kenny Dillingham is doing, they get them at home. Fun spot there for the Clones to try and pick off the playoff team from the Big 12 last year. And then
big revenge spot, too, after the championship game.
Yeah, sure. Big revenge spot. TCU is, I think, a tricky road game, and that's not off a bye week. So that'll be coming off of a home game against Arizona State. Then you go to Fort Worth to take on a very explosive offense that, we'll see if they can run the ball. And then Kansas and Oklahoma State to finish it. I mean, you can certainly talk yourself into 10-2 for the Clones. There's no doubt about it.